The quiet waitress who didn't bow. The night the obsidian chalice glittered like a jeweled throat in the heart of Nightspire City, everyone arrived already afraid. Not the soft, ordinary fear mortals carried like coins in their pockets. Counted, spent, replaced. This was the deep fear that lived in the walls, in the black marble pillars carved with old warnings, in the chandelier crystals that never truly reflected anyone's face the same way twice. The kind of fear that reminded you, even before you saw him, that this kingdom belonged to creatures who didn't need the sun, and didn't need your permission to take what they wanted. Inside the chalice, the air smelled of night-blooming roses and expensive smoke. Gold-masked nobles laughed too loudly. Immortals with eyes like polished stones sat with their backs straight, pretending they were above superstition while secretly listening for a single set of footsteps. Even the musicians played carefully, as if one wrong note might be taken as an insult. Because tonight wasn't just another gathering. Tonight was an announcement. Tonight, Valesra Noctane, beloved by none, feared by many, adored by those who needed her favor, was parading her engagement like a blade. She moved through the hall as if the floor had been laid for her alone. Her gown was crimson so deep it looked almost black until it caught the light. Rubies circled her throat like a warning. Her smile was practiced, elegant, and utterly joyless. "Make sure the mortal servers understand," she had told the manager an hour ago, her voice silky as poison. "No one looks at me too long. No one speaks unless spoken to. And absolutely no one disrupts my night." The manager had bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the marble. "Of course, my lady." He had not dared mention that mortals did not disrupt nights here. They survived them. Mira Ellen had learned that rule within her first week. She stood near the side archway, holding a silver tray with a crystal decanter balanced at its center. Her uniform was simple: black dress, white apron, sleeves buttoned tight. Her hair was pinned neatly the way the floor supervisor demanded. Her posture was still, her expression calm. Too calm, some said. Because most mortals in Nightspire City moved like shadows. Heads lowered, shoulders rounded, eyes trained on anything except the faces of those who could ruin them with a glance. But Mira had a different kind of stillness. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't ignorance either. It was restraint. The kind of restraint you learn when your life has already been shattered once, and you've decided you will not allow it to be shattered again by anyone's cruelty. 3 months ago, she had arrived in Nightspire's mortal quarter with one small satchel, a single ring wrapped in cloth, and a letter of reference that was more mercy than endorsement. No family followed her. No friends wrote to her. No one asked where she had come from. In Nightspire, silence was safety. So Mira worked, quietly, perfectly, invisibly, until tonight. Because the moment Valesra Noctane chose her as entertainment, the room shifted, like a predator turning its head. Valesra's gaze landed on Mira and didn't move away. A hush rolled across the chalice, and even the soft clink of glasses seemed to retreat. Mira approached the table, tray steady, steps controlled. She stopped exactly the required distance away, and lowered her eyes to the level of Valesra's collarbone, not submissive enough to be mock-worthy, not bold enough to be punishable. "Your selection, my lady," Mira said, voice low and professional. "The Black Orchard Reserve." Valesra leaned back in her chair as if she had all night. "Look at me." The command was quiet, but it cracked through the room like ice. Mira lifted her eyes. Not for long. Just long enough to meet Valesra's gaze without flinching. A sharp inhale moved through the nearby nobles, like they'd all witnessed someone step too close to a cliff. Valesra smiled, delighted. "Well," she said, slow and pleased, "the new girl has teeth." "I'm doing my job," Mira replied gently. The gentle tone was her mistake. Valesra's smile thinned. "Your job is to be unseen." Mira did not respond. She began to pour the decanter into Valesra's glass, careful and controlled, letting the dark liquid catch the chandelier light like spilled midnight. Valesra watched the pour and then, without even looking properly, she said, "Wrong." Mira paused mid-motion, the decanter held perfectly still. "Excuse me, my lady?" Valesra lifted her glass, swirled it once, and sniffed like someone inspecting spoiled fruit. "This is not the reserve I ordered." Myra's heart did not jump the way the manager's had earlier. It simply tightened, as if an invisible thread had been pulled inside her chest. Because she knew this game. Tonight's entertainment wasn't the wine. It was the humiliation. Still, she kept her voice even. "The seal is correct. Black Orchard Reserve, commissioned in the year of the eclipse accord." Valesra's eyes brightened, as if Mira had offered her a gift. "Did you just correct me?" "No," Mira said carefully. "I stated what's on the decanter. If you'd prefer another selection, I can bring it. Valesra set her glass down with a soft click. Do you know who I am, mortal? Yes, Mira answered. The music stopped. Not dramatically. Not like a theatrical cue. Like the violinist's hands had simply frozen in fear. Valesra leaned forward. Then why are you still speaking? Because Mira had spent too many years swallowing her voice. Because she had once been brilliant in a world that promised fairness, and watched that fairness turn into a weapon used against her. Because she had come to Nightspire to disappear and discovered that disappearing didn't stop cruelty. It only made cruelty easier. Mira lowered the decanter slightly, keeping her hands steady. Because you asked me a question, my lady? A ripple of tension moved through the room, nobles shifting in their seats, immortals glancing toward the shadows as if someone might appear. Valesra's smile returned, slow and hungry. So you believe you deserve to stand here? To meet my eyes? To speak to me? I believe, Mira said quietly, that respect doesn't require humiliation. The words didn't sound loud. But in Nightspire, truth rarely needed volume. Valesra stared at her as if Mira had slapped her. Then she laughed, soft, cold, delighted. How pretty, she murmured. The mortal thinks she's a lesson. Her hand lifted, delicate and jeweled, and Mira braced instinctively, expecting a slap, a clawed strike, some punishment designed to draw blood without leaving marks. Instead, Valesra's fingers curled around the decanter. And she hurled it. The crystal flew past Myra's face by inches and shattered against a marble pillar behind her. Dark wine exploded across the stone in a spray that made several mortals flinch and shrink back. Glass fragments glittered on the floor like broken stars. Mira didn't move. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She simply turned her head slightly, looked at the shattered wreck of the decanter, and then returned her gaze to Valesra. That calm, that refusal to be theatrical, ignited something ugly in Valesra's expression. How dare you, Valesra hissed, rising. Her nails lengthened, subtle but unmistakable, sharp points catching the chandelier light. The manager took one step forward and then stopped, trembling like a leaf. No one in the chalice moved to intervene. No one ever did. Because Valesra wasn't simply cruel. She was protected. Engaged. Promised. To the Vampire King. And the Vampire King was known for silence, not sentiment. Then a voice spoke from the farthest corner of the hall. Enough. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words spread like a shadow swallowing candles. Everyone turned. From the deepest draped shadow near the high windows, a figure rose. He moved like night given shape, tall, controlled, impossibly still. His coat was black, but not the mortal kind of black. It seemed to absorb light and give nothing back. His hair was dark and neat, his face carved with sharp angles and ancient restraint. But it was his eyes that changed the room. They weren't red like the cheap stories mortals told each other. They were dark, so dark they looked almost like a starless sky. And they held no confusion, no indulgence. Only judgment. King Lucian Veilthorn. The Night Sovereign. The ruler of every shadow in Nightspire and beyond. Valesra's body transformed in a heartbeat. Her fury melted into sweetness, her posture shifting, her lips forming a smile so practiced it should have been a crime. My king, she purred, stepping toward him. This mortal. Lucian didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on Mira. On the quiet waitress with wine on her apron and glass at her feet and a calm expression she had no right to wear in the face of death. Valesra's smile wavered just slightly. The reserve, Valesra continued, her voice tightening. She brought the wrong reserve and then accused me of lying. Lucian spoke again, and this time the air itself seemed to obey him. You ordered the Black Orchard Reserve. Valesra froze. Myra's pulse finally shifted, not into panic but into alertness. Because this wasn't simply the king correcting someone. This was the king doing it publicly. In front of witnesses. In front of nobles who would whisper for centuries. Valesra's lips parted. My king. Lucian's gaze flicked to the shattered decanter, then back to Valesra. His voice stayed even. You broke it. Valesra swallowed. I was upset. You were staging a spectacle, Lucian said, still calm. And you chose the wrong stage. A low murmur ran through the hall like wind through dead leaves. Valesra's face tightened, humiliation flashing behind her eyes like lightning behind clouds. She looked around and realized, too late, that the room was not watching her with fear. It was watching her with curiosity. And curiosity was the first step toward losing control. She forced a laugh. Darling, you misunderstand. I'm only teaching the staff discipline. Lucian finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her presence. His gaze was not cruel. It was worse. It was indifferent. "Leave," he said. Valesra blinked. "My king?" Lucien's voice didn't change. "Before you embarrass yourself further." The room went so still Mira could hear her own breath. Valesra's cheeks flushed with a violent crimson, her composure cracking. Her eyes darted toward Mira, pure venom, a promise with teeth. Then she bowed, stiff and shaking with fury. "As you wish." She swept away toward the arched exit, her cloak trailing like a wound. As she passed Mira, her shoulder bumped her hard, intentional, sharp enough to sting. Mira staggered half a step and caught herself. She did not fall. She did not apologize. And she did not look away. The doors closed behind Valesra like a tomb ceiling. Slowly, sound returned to the chalice. Whispers, soft movements, the nervous restarting of music. Servants rushed forward to clean broken glass. The manager's hands were shaking so badly he dropped a cloth. Mira stood still among the chaos, aware of one terrible truth. Valesra would not forget. And Lucien had just seen her. The Vampire King remained where he was, standing in the center of the hall as if the room had rearranged itself around him. His attention never left Myra's face. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a certainty that turned her bones cold. "Your name," he said, was not a question. Mira swallowed carefully. "Mira Ellen, Your Majesty." Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly as if he were tasting the sound of it. "Mira Ellen," he repeated. A pause, long enough for Mira to feel every stare in the room pin her in place. "You've been here," Lucien said, 3 months? Myra's stomach tightened. She didn't know how he knew. "Yes, Your Majesty. And you are either very brave," he continued, "or very tired of fear." Myra's throat tightened. The honest answer rose up before she could stop it. "Both." Something shifted in Lucien's face, so subtle no one else might have seen it. Not warmth. Not softness. Recognition. The kind that frightened her more than anger. Because anger was expected. Recognition meant interest. And interest from a vampire king was not a gift. It was a force. Lucien's gaze flicked briefly to the blood wine stains on her apron, then returned to her eyes. "Collect your things." Myra's breath caught. "Your Majesty?" Lucien didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You will not return to service here." The manager looked like he might faint. The other servers stared at Mira with a mixture of pity and horror. Myra's mind raced. Dismissal meant unemployment. Unemployment meant eviction. Eviction meant the streets, where mortals didn't survive long. And Valesra, furious and humiliated, would not waste such an opportunity. Mira forced her voice steady. "I understand." Lucien watched her for a long moment, as if he were reading pages no one else could see. Then he said, "You will come to the royal estate at sunset." Myra's heart stopped. Not metaphorically. It felt like her body simply forgot how to beat for one terrifying second. The noble's whispers spiked. The manager made a sound like a choked prayer. Mira lifted her eyes, just briefly, and saw no cruelty in Lucien's expression. Only certainty. "Come alone," Lucien added, as if he were giving a simple instruction about table settings. Mira found her voice with effort. "May I ask why, Your Majesty?" Lucien's gaze did not soften. But his words, quiet as falling ash, landed in her chest like a prophecy. "Because," he said, "you looked at my fiancée and did not bow." Pause. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, he added, "And I need to know what you are." Myra's fingers curled slightly at her sides. She wasn't anyone special. She was a waitress. A mortal. A woman with a past she didn't speak about. A woman who had no right to be standing in the center of immortal politics. Yet the Vampire King had just summoned her. Publicly. Tonight. And Valesra had watched it happen. Mira knew the truth the moment Lucien stepped back into the shadows. Whatever came next would change her life forever. And she had no idea whether it would save her or destroy her. Mira did not remember walking back to the staff corridor. She remembered broken crystal glinting like icy teeth on the marble. She remembered the manager's face, gray, sweating as if he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. She remembered the other servers parting from her path like she carried plague. And she remembered Valesra's final look. Not a threat. A promise. By the time Mira reached the narrow locker room behind the kitchens, her hands had started to shake. Not from fear of losing her job, she'd lost things bigger than that. Not from fear of the nobles gossiping. Mortals were always gossip fuel. Her fear was sharper. More specific. Because the Vampire King had said, "Come to the royal estate at sunset. Come alone." And in Nightspire, a royal summons wasn't an invitation. It was a verdict. The floor supervisor, a middle-aged mortal woman named Hessa, stood near the doorway with her arms crossed. She'd always been harsh, always searching for mistakes because harshness kept you alive here. But tonight her eyes were wide. "Don't be stupid," Hessa whispered the moment Mira approached. "Don't go." Myra's throat tightened. "If I don't go," Hessa swallowed hard, "then you die." "And if I do go?" Hessa didn't answer. Silence was answer enough. Mira opened her locker with stiff fingers and removed her small satchel. Inside was a folded shawl, a comb, a tiny pouch of coins, and a ring wrapped in cloth. Old silver, plain but strangely heavy, as if it had weight beyond metal. She stared at the ring for a long moment. Her mother had pressed it into her palm before she was sent away. Before the accusations. Before the world that had once been bright turned into something that only had shadows. "Keep it hidden," her mother had whispered. "It's not for them. It's for the day you need to remember who you are." Mira hadn't known what that meant then. She still didn't. But tonight, with a vampire king's gaze cutting through her memories, she felt something in that ring pulse like a heartbeat. She wrapped it tighter and shoved it deeper into her satchel. Hessa gripped Myra's sleeve. Her fingers trembled. "Listen to me. If you've ever cared about your life, you—" "I don't have a choice," Mira interrupted softly. Hessa's mouth twisted, grief and anger fighting for space. "No one has choices here." Mira stepped past her. She left the obsidian chalice through the servant's side door, into the cold breath of Nightspire's twilight. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of color that never became true night because in this city, true night belonged to the king. The streets were quieter than usual. Mortals hurried with heads down, cloaks tight as if they sensed the shift. As if the city itself knew one of its smallest creatures had been pulled into the orbit of its darkest star. Mira walked back to the mortal quarter on feet that felt like stone. Her boarding house stood like a stack of crumbling bones. 6 floors, narrow windows, external stairs that rattled in the wind. She climbed them slowly, each step echoing in her ears like a countdown. Inside her tiny room, she bolted the door and sat on her mattress. Only then did she let her breath shake. Only then did she let her eyes sting. She did not cry. Crying was loud. Loud was dangerous. Instead, she stared at the wall so close to her window it blocked the world, and she tried to think like someone who still believed life could be logical. Why would Lucien Veilthorn summon a mortal waitress? To punish her? To interrogate her? To use her as a tool against his fiancée? Or something worse? Mira pressed her palm to her chest and felt her heart beat, fast, stubborn, alive. She had stood her ground against Valesra because she couldn't stand the taste of humiliation anymore. But she had not expected the king to notice. She had not expected his eyes to hold her like an invisible chain. A sound scraped outside her door. Myra's spine went rigid. Then, soft as a whisper, something slid beneath the crack. A sealed envelope. Heavy parchment. Black wax. A crest stamped into it. A crown above a thorned rose wrapped in a serpent's coil. Myra's blood went cold. She picked it up with careful fingers as if it might bite. The seal was real. The summons was real. And it wasn't just words spoken in the heat of a scandal. It was official. It was written. It was recorded. She broke the wax. Inside, a single line of elegant script, ink dark as dried blood. "You are expected at the royal estate at sunset. Come alone. No explanation. No mercy. Only expectation." Mira read it twice. 3 times. Then she set it down on the shelf beside her few belongings and forced herself to stand. If she had hours left, she would use them. Not to beg. Not to panic. To prepare. She washed in cold water from her basin, scrubbing away the faint smell of wine and fear from her skin. She braided her hair tightly. She changed into her simplest dress, gray, mended at the hem, clean but worn. She put on her cloak, the one she'd patched so many times it looked like a map of old wounds. She looked in the small cracked mirror. A young woman stared back, pale from the city's lack of sun. Eyes too steady for someone who should be broken. Lips pressed tight, not from arrogance but from resolve. "Don't fall apart," Mira whispered to her reflection. Her reflection didn't answer. Outside, day dragged into evening like a reluctant prisoner. Mira lay on the bed and closed her eyes, forcing her body to rest even when her mind refused. Memories rose like ghosts, her old life, the scandal, the cruel voices, the way people turned away when it was easier than believing in her innocence. She had been powerless then too. She had been humiliated then too. But tonight humiliation wasn't the danger. Tonight power was. When the last light outside her window shifted from gray to violet, Mira rose. Sunset. Execution hour. She stepped out into the street. Nightspire's air tasted different as she moved toward the noble district. Cleaner, colder, thick with old magic. Buildings grew taller and more refined. Marble replaced crumbling stone. Gas lamps ignited in ornate iron cages, flames flickering with unnatural steadiness. The closer she came to the royal estate, the quieter the city became. Even the wind seemed careful. The estate rose at the heart of Nightspire like a crown of obsidian thorns. Towers pierced the sky. Walls curved outward in layers, each carved with symbols older than the mortal language. Gate doors stood open, not welcoming but certain. 2 guards flanked the entrance. They were not human. Their eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried under ash. Their skin was smooth, too perfect, too still. They looked at Mira. And then they stepped aside. No questions. No hesitation. As if they had been waiting for her. Mira's throat tightened. She walked through the gate. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world changed. The city's faint noise disappeared, swallowed by a silence so complete it felt like pressure. The air smelled of stone and roses and something metallic beneath it. Something that reminded her she was surrounded by predators who did not need to hunt openly. A servant, immortal, pale, expressionless, appeared as if summoned by thought. "This way," he said. His voice carried no cruelty but no warmth either. Mira followed. They moved through corridors lined with black velvet drapes and portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her. Her footsteps sounded too loud on the polished floor. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. But the gates were behind her. The choice, if it had ever existed, was gone. The servant stopped before a massive door carved with thorned roses. He didn't knock. He simply opened it. And Mira stepped into the throne chamber. It wasn't what she expected. No gold. No glittering indulgence. The room was vast and dark and spare, built of obsidian stone that absorbed light. A single long window of stained glass towered behind the throne, depicting a black rose bleeding into a silver moon. At the far end, on a seat that looked carved from shadow itself, sat King Lucien Veilthorn. He wasn't wearing a crown. He didn't need one. Power clung to him like a second skin. His posture was relaxed, but the relaxed posture of a creature who could kill without effort. His hands rested on the arms of the throne. His eyes were fixed on Mira as if he had been watching her long before she entered. The servant vanished quietly behind her, closing the door. Mira was alone. With him. Lucien's gaze traced her, her plain dress, her worn cloak, the way she held herself as if refusing to be small. "Approach," he said. Mira stepped forward, careful not to rush. She stopped several paces away because she did not know the correct distance to stand from a vampire king when your life belonged to his whim. Lucien studied her in silence. The silence stretched long enough that Mira's pulse started to slow, then spike again. Finally he spoke. "You were dismissed." Mira swallowed. "Yes, your majesty. And yet you came." "I was summoned." Lucien's mouth twitched, barely. Not a smile. Something closer to interest. "You corrected my fiancée." "I corrected the label," Mira said quietly. "Not her." Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you believe there is a difference?" Mira's hands tightened inside her cloak. "Yes." "Explain." Mira chose her words like stepping stones across a river. "One is truth. The other is insult. I did not insult her. I refused to participate in something that wasn't true." Lucien leaned back just slightly as if her answer pleased him more than it should have. "And when she threw the decanter at you," he continued, voice calm, "you didn't flinch." Mira's throat tightened. "I didn't want to give her the satisfaction." Lucien's gaze sharpened. "So you understand spectacle?" Mira hesitated. "'Cause yes, she did. In her old life, she had watched powerful people destroy reputations with whispers and smiles. In Nightspire, power did it with claws. "It's how fear is fed," Mira said softly. Lucien's eyes held hers. "And you starved it." Mira's skin prickled. There was no praise in his tone. Only observation. As if he were studying a rare creature and deciding whether it was dangerous. Lucien stood. The room seemed to darken by instinct, the shadows leaning toward him as if he controlled them with breath alone. He descended the steps from his throne with slow, deliberate grace, approaching Mira. Mira's body froze, every mortal instinct screaming to run. She didn't. She forced herself to remain still. Lucien stopped close, too close. The air around him was colder. Not from temperature but from presence. From the unnatural way the world seemed to obey him. He lifted one hand. Mira braced. Instead of striking her, his fingers brushed the edge of her braid, gentle, testing, as if confirming she was real. "You're not trembling?" he said. Myra's voice came out thin. "I am inside." Lucien's gaze flicked to her throat where her pulse beat fast. "Your body betrays you." Mira swallowed. "My body is mortal." Lucien's hand dropped. He circled her slowly, like a predator but not hunting. Assessing. "You don't smell like the others," he murmured. Myra's breath caught. "What do I smell like?" Lucien paused behind her shoulder. His voice was low, almost thoughtful. "Old paper," he said. "Rain. And something silver." Myra's fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel beneath her cloak. "The ring." A silence fell. Then Lucien's voice changed, still calm but deeper, edged with command. "Show me what you're hiding." Myra's stomach dropped. She forced herself to face him. "Your Majesty, I'm not." "Do not lie," Lucien said softly. The words did not sound angry, but they pressed against Myra's mind like an unseen hand. Myra's vision blurred for a heartbeat. Her body wanted to obey without understanding why. Vampire compulsion. The stories were true. Mira clenched her jaw so hard it hurt. She dug her nails into her palm inside her cloak, pain sharp enough to anchor her. Lucien's eyes narrowed, and for the first time something like surprise flickered in them, because Mira did not step forward obediently. She did not drop to her knees. She stood there, trembling now, not from fear but from resisting a force that wanted to bend her will like a reed. Lucien tilted his head. "Interesting." Myra's breath came fast. "I'm not hiding weapons. I'm not a spy. I'm just human." Lucien finished. Mira swallowed. "Yes." Lucien took one step closer. Shadows curled at his feet like living smoke. His voice lowered, dangerously gentle. "Humans do not resist me." Myra's pulse hammered. "Then maybe I'm not only human." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The moment they did, the air shifted. Lucien's gaze locked on her like a blade finding its target. "What did you say?" Mira froze. She didn't know if she had just saved herself, or sentenced herself. Her mind flashed to her mother's hands pushing that ring into her palm. "Keep it hidden." Lucien's voice was quiet now, but it carried weight. "Mira Ellen. Tell me who you are." Myra's throat tightened. "I don't know," she admitted. Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then he turned away, slowly walking back toward the throne. "Then we will find out," he said. Myra's stomach twisted. "How?" Lucien stopped at the base of the dais and looked back at her. "Valesra humiliated you tonight," he said. "She intended to break you." Mira didn't answer. There was no point denying what everyone had seen. Lucien's eyes darkened. She overplayed her cruelty. She exposed something weak in herself. Myra's voice came out careful. "And you stopped her." "I corrected her," Lucien said. "There is a difference." Myra's breath caught at the echo of her own earlier words. Lucien's mouth twitched again, almost amused. "You learn fast," he murmured. Then his gaze hardened. "But you are now involved." Myra's chest tightened. "I never wanted." "Wanting is irrelevant," Lucien interrupted, voice calm and absolute. "You humiliated the future queen of Nightspire in public." Myra's stomach dropped. "I didn't." "You did," Lucien said simply. "Because you remained standing." A silence. Then Lucien added, "She will retaliate." Myra's mouth went dry. "I know." Lucien's eyes held hers. "Your boarding house is not warded. Your street is not protected. Your mortal quarter is a hunting ground." Mira felt dizzy. "Then why summon me here? If you know she'll—" "Because," Lucien said, and for the first time his voice carried something like anger, cold, controlled, terrifying. "No one harms what I have claimed." Myra's heart slammed. "Claimed." The word echoed in her skull like a bell. She forced her voice steady. "I am not yours to claim." Lucien's gaze sharpened, not offended, intrigued. "You speak boldly for someone with no shield." Myra's chin lifted slightly, though fear burned through her. "Maybe I've been without a shield my whole life." Lucien stared at her. Then, slowly he extended one hand. In his palm lay a small object, silver black, intricately carved. A thin bracelet shaped like thorn vines. "A ward," Lucien said. "Wear it." Mira hesitated. "What does it do?" "It will keep lesser predators from touching you," Lucien said. "Not because it will hurt them. Because it will remind them who you belong to." Myra's stomach turned again at the possessive certainty. I don't belong to anyone, she whispered. Lucien's eyes did not soften, but his voice lowered, dangerously intimate. Not yet, he said. Myra's breath caught. Her mind screamed to refuse. But she thought of her boarding house. Her unwarded door. Valesra's venomous promise. Mira reached out, fingers shaking, and took the bracelet. The metal was cold, so cold it stung. The moment it touched her skin, something pulsed beneath it, like a heartbeat of ancient magic. Mira gasped softly. Lucien watched her reaction closely. It recognizes you. Mira stared at the bracelet. Why? Lucien didn't answer immediately. Then he said, because something about you is older than your fear. Mira looked up, throat tight. What do you want from me? Lucien's gaze held hers, steady and terrifying. The truth, he said. And the reason you resist my will. Mira swallowed. And if I can't give you answers? Lucien stepped closer again, voice quiet as shadow. Then you will stay here, he said. Myra's eyes widened. Here? In the estate. Lucien nodded once. You are safer under my roof. Myra's chest tightened with panic. That's not safety. That's captivity. Lucien's expression didn't change. Call it what you wish. But you will not return to the mortal quarter tonight. Myra's mind raced. If she refused, she might walk out and die before she reached home. If she agreed, she would be inside the king's estate, within reach of his power, his politics, his fiancée's hatred. Either way, she was trapped. Lucien turned slightly toward the door, and his voice became command again. Prepare a chamber, he said, speaking to someone unseen. The shadows shifted. A servant appeared soundlessly at the edge of the room and bowed. As you command, my king. Myra's breath came fast. Your Majesty, Lucien, please? Lucien looked at her sharply. Mira froze at the way her tongue had dared to shape his name. For a long moment he stared at her. Then unexpectedly his voice softened, not warm but less distant. You do not understand what you did tonight, he said quietly. Myra's voice trembled. Then tell me. Lucien's gaze moved past her, toward the stained glass window, the black rose bleeding into a silver moon. You defied Valesra, he said. And you did it in front of my court. He looked back at Mira. And you did it without begging. Pause. That is not merely bravery, Lucien murmured. It is a language. Mira frowned. A language? Lucien's eyes darkened. One I have not heard in centuries. Myra's skin prickled. The servant returned and bowed again. The chamber is ready, my king. Lucien nodded once. Then he faced Mira fully, and his voice dropped into something that felt like both warning and vow. From this moment, he said, you will not be alone again in this kingdom. Myra's heart pounded. Is that a promise? Lucien's gaze held hers, unreadable. It is an order, he said. Then he turned and walked toward the side door. Mira stood frozen, trapped between fear and something else. Something dangerous and unfamiliar. Interest. A strange pull. A sense that the shadows had noticed her. Lucien paused at the doorway and looked back once. Do not run, he said softly. It would force me to chase you. Myra's breath caught. The door opened. And the vampire king disappeared into the dark corridors, leaving Mira alone in the throne chamber with a bracelet that burned cold against her wrist and a terrifying realization settling into her bones. Tonight wasn't the end of her humiliation. It was the beginning of her belonging. The girl the shadows recognized. Mira did not sleep that night. Not because the chamber assigned to her was uncomfortable, quite the opposite. The room was vast and quiet, draped in dark velvet and lit by a single crystal lamp that glowed without flame. The bed was soft enough to swallow exhaustion whole. The air was warm, clean, and faintly scented with roses and rain. Luxury was not what kept her awake. It was the silence. Not the ordinary absence of sound, but a watchful silence. The kind that pressed against her skin, alert and aware, as if the walls themselves were listening. Mira sat on the edge of the bed, fingers clasped tightly in her lap. The bracelet Lucien had given her rested against her wrist, cold but alive. Every few minutes it pulsed softly, like a second heartbeat responding to something unseen. She hated it. And she hated how safe she felt wearing it. In the mortal quarter, safety had always been conditional. A locked door. A kind landlord. A quiet night. Here, safety came from something far more dangerous. Power that did not ask permission. Mira rose and crossed the room slowly, barefoot on obsidian tile. She approached the tall window overlooking the inner gardens of the estate. The gardens were not lush. They were disciplined. Black leaf trees stood in perfect formation. Pale flowers bloomed only at night, their petals catching moonlight like polished bone. Stone paths curved in precise patterns, each one leading somewhere intentional. Nothing here was wild. Nothing here was free. Mira pressed her palm lightly against the glass. "Why me?" she whispered. The glass did not answer. But the bracelet warmed slightly as if acknowledging the question. She turned away sharply. She had been summoned, claimed, warded, and not once had anyone asked what she wanted. Her door opened without a sound. Mira spun, heart racing. A servant stood just inside the threshold, female, immortal, pale as moonstone. Her eyes were silver and unreadable. "You are awake," the servant said softly. "I wasn't told I had a curfew," Mira replied before she could stop herself. The servant inclined her head, unoffended. "You have none. The king instructed that you be undisturbed." Mira's stomach tightened at the casual authority of the words. "Why are you here?" Mira asked. "To escort you," the servant said. "The king has requested your presence." Mira's pulse jumped. "Now?" "Yes." She glanced toward the window. The moon was high. The night felt deep, dangerously deep. "I wasn't told there would be another summons," Mira said carefully. The servant's lips curved faintly. "The king does not announce his thoughts in advance." Of course he didn't. Mira followed the servant into the corridor, her bare feet silent on the polished stone. They moved deeper into the estate, past doors carved with sigils, past alcoves filled with shadowed statues whose eyes seemed almost alive. "Does he do this often?" Mira asked quietly. "Summon mortals in the middle of the night?" The servant did not slow. "No." Mira's heart sank. "That's reassuring." They stopped before a door Mira hadn't seen before, taller than the others, unmarked except for a single carved symbol above it, a rose split by a vertical line. The servant bowed once. "Enter." Mira hesitated. "Will you stay?" The servant met her gaze, and for the first time Mira saw something almost like pity flicker in her silver eyes. "No," she said. The door opened. Mira stepped inside. The room was smaller than the throne chamber but more intimate. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, ancient volumes bound in leather, vellum, materials Mira didn't recognize. A long table stood at the center, scattered with scrolls, glass instruments, and small bowls etched with symbols. Lucien stood near the table, sleeves rolled back slightly, his dark hair loose instead of neatly bound. He looked less like a king, more like a scholar who had lived too long and learned too much. "You're awake," he said without turning. "I wasn't asleep," Mira replied. Lucien glanced at her, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Good." He gestured to the table. "Come closer." Mira obeyed slowly, every instinct warning her that proximity to Lucien was dangerous in ways she did not yet understand. On the table lay a thin sheet of parchment. And her ring. Mira stopped cold. "That's mine," she said sharply. Lucien's gaze lifted to her face. "Yes." Her fingers curled into fists. "You took it." "I removed it from your satchel," Lucien corrected. "You did not feel it." Mira's breath caught. "You violated my privacy." Lucien studied her calmly. "I protected your life." "You could have asked." Lucien's eyes darkened slightly. "Would you have given it willingly?" Mira hesitated. "No," she admitted. Lucien nodded once as if confirming something. "Then we are aligned." Mira stared at the ring, old silver, dull, unassuming. It looked harmless. It had never felt harmless. "What do you know about it?" Mira asked quietly. Lucien picked it up between two fingers. The metal did not burn him. It did not react. But the shadows around the table stirred. "This ring," Lucien said slowly, "is not mortal craftsmanship." Mira's heart slammed. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Lucien asked. He turned the ring slightly, revealing faint engravings along the inner band, marks Mira had seen but never understood. Symbols worn smooth by time. "These sigils are older than my reign," Lucien continued. "Older than this city." Mira swallowed. "My mother gave it to me." Lucien's gaze sharpened. "Your mother was not human." The words hit Mira like a blow. "That's a lie," she whispered. Lucien did not soften. "Your blood tells a different story." Mira shook her head, backing away half a step. "You don't know me." Lucien stepped closer, voice low. "Your blood resisted my compulsion. Your presence disrupts wards designed to repel mortals. The shadows respond to you as if they recognize something familiar." Mira's breath came fast. "I'm just a woman who lost everything." Lucien's voice dropped. "No. You are a woman who survived being erased. Silence fell. Lucien placed the ring back on the table. Tell me about your past. Mira laughed softly, bitterly. Which part? The part you don't speak about, Lucien said. Mira stared at the ring. Then she spoke. She spoke of the university. Of the research position she had earned through years of relentless work. Of the mentor who praised her brilliance publicly, and destroyed her privately when she refused him. Of the accusations whispered into the right ears. Of how truth became irrelevant once power decided otherwise. I was erased, Mira said quietly. Not killed. Not imprisoned. Just erased. Lucien listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "That is not how humans destroy each other." Mira looked up sharply. Excuse me? Humans kill quickly, Lucien said. They erase slowly only when guided by something older. Mira's skin prickled. Guided by what? Lucien's gaze held hers. Fear of what you represent. Mira shook her head. I don't represent anything. Lucien stepped closer. You represent memory. Mira's chest tightened. I don't understand. Lucien picked up a small glass bowl from the table. Inside it, a dark liquid shimmered faintly. Your ring, he said, is a blood key. Mira's stomach dropped. A what? A relic, Lucien explained. Bound to a lineage that predates the current vampire houses. A lineage sworn to balance, not dominance. Mira's voice trembled. That sounds like a myth. Lucien's eyes softened just a fraction. All truths begin as myths. He gestured to the bowl. Your blood would confirm it. Mira recoiled. You want to cut me? Lucien shook his head. No. I want you to choose. Mira laughed again, hollow. You don't do choices. Lucien's gaze did not waver. I do not force what resists me. Mira hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. But another feeling stirred beneath it, curiosity, recognition. A strange sense of coming home to something she had never known. What happens if I refuse? She asked. Lucien's voice was honest. You remain protected. Ignorant. And Valestra continues to plot your destruction. Mira swallowed. And if I agree? Lucien's eyes darkened. Then the court will learn that my fiancée humiliated someone she should have feared. Mira stared at the bowl. At the ring. At the king who watched her not like prey, but like a puzzle. She rolled up her sleeve. Lucien did not move. Mira took a small blade from the table, pressed it against her fingertip, and cut. A single drop of blood fell into the bowl. The liquid flared silver. The room changed. The shadows surged, not violently but eagerly. Symbols along the walls ignited faintly. The ring vibrated against the table, humming with quiet power. Lucien inhaled sharply. His eyes, ancient and controlled, flashed with something dangerously close to awe. Impossible, he murmured. Mira's breath caught. What? Lucien looked at her like the world had shifted beneath his feet. You are not merely descended from them, he said slowly. You are the last. Mira's knees weakened. The last of what? Lucien stepped toward her, voice low and reverent. The Night Wardens, he said. The ones who once stood beside kings and reminded monsters what restraint meant. Mira shook her head. I don't want this. Lucien's gaze softened, truly softened for the first time. I know, he said quietly. A tremor ran through the estate. Far away a scream echoed. Lucien's head snapped toward the sound. Valestra. Mira's heart pounded. What did she do? Lucien's jaw tightened. She sensed the shift. Mira's voice trembled. Because of me? Lucien met her gaze. Because the kingdom just remembered you exist. The shadows coiled closer around Mira, not threatening. Protective. Lucien reached out slowly, deliberately, and rested his hand over her wounded finger. The bleeding stopped instantly. His touch was cold but steady. Grounding. From this moment, Lucien said quietly, you are no longer invisible. Mira's voice shook. I never wanted to be seen. Lucien's thumb brushed her knuckle, gentle, almost intimate. Neither did I, he said. Once. Their eyes held. Something dangerous and undeniable passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. Recognition. And fear. And the beginning of a bond neither of them could sever. The fiancé who chose war. The scream echoed again, closer this time. Mira felt it before she truly heard it, a vibration in her bones that made the bracelet on her wrist flare cold and bright. The shadows around the chamber shifted, tightening like a living thing preparing to strike. Lucien's hand was still wrapped around hers. The moment stretched, fragile, electric. Then Lucien released her and straightened, every trace of softness vanishing from his posture. The king returned in an instant, as absolute and unyielding as the obsidian walls around them. "Stay here," he ordered. Mira shook her head, panic flaring. "Something's wrong." Lucien's gaze flicked to her, sharp, conflicted. "Everything is wrong." Another scream cut through the estate, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Lucien turned toward the door, shadows rising around him like a cloak. Valesra has crossed a line. Myra's heart pounded. What kind of line? Lucien's voice was cold enough to frost stone. The kind that cannot be stepped back from. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned back to Mira. "You are not a weapon," he said, his voice low but firm. "No matter what you are." Mira swallowed. "I don't feel like anything." Lucien stepped closer, his presence heavy and protective. "You will." Then he did something that made her breath catch. He bowed his head. Not deeply. Not ceremonially. Just enough to acknowledge her. A night warden. A balance. The truth. Mira stared as Lucien straightened and strode from the chamber, the doors slamming shut behind him with a sound like thunder. Silence rushed back in, thin and brittle. Mira stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then the bracelet burned. Not painfully but urgently. As if pulling her. "No," she whispered. "I'm not ready." The shadows did not listen. They parted. The door opened. Mira stepped into the corridor just as chaos erupted. Servants ran, immortal and mortal alike, faces pale, eyes wide. One stumbled past Mira without seeing her. Another whispered prayers under their breath. Smoke drifted through the hall, carrying the scent of scorched magic. Mira followed the pull of the bracelet, heart hammering, every instinct screaming that she was walking directly into danger. The corridors widened into the eastern atrium, a space of soaring arches and tall windows overlooking the city. And there stood Valesra Noctane. She was no longer elegant. Her crimson gown was torn at the hem. Her hair spilled loose over her shoulders. Her eyes burned, literally burned, with crimson light, fury stripping away every mask she had ever worn. Around her, shattered glass and overturned tables lay scattered like debris from a storm. 2 guards lay unconscious at her feet. Lucien stood several paces away, perfectly still. The air between them crackled with restrained violence. "You humiliated me," Valesra hissed. Lucien's voice was calm. "You humiliated yourself." Valesra laughed, high and unhinged. "You chose a mortal over me." Lucien's gaze did not flicker. "I chose truth." Valesra's eyes snapped past him, locked onto Mira. The world seemed to tilt. "There you are," Valesra purred, her smile sharp and cruel. "The quiet little thing who thinks she's special." Lucien moved instantly, stepping between them. "Do not look at her," he commanded. Valesra's laughter rang through the atrium. "You didn't deny it." Mira felt the weight of Valesra's gaze press against her skin like claws. "You don't even know what you are," Valesra sneered. "You don't belong in this world." Myra's hands trembled, but she stepped forward anyway. Lucien's head snapped toward her. "Mira, I'm tired of being told where I belong," she said. The words surprised her as much as anyone else. Valesra's eyes narrowed. "Careful, little human. You're standing very close to extinction." Myra's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "You humiliate others because you're afraid." The atrium went deadly still. Valesra's smile vanished. "Afraid?" she whispered. "Yes," Mira continued, her voice gaining strength. "Afraid that without fear no one would choose you." Valesra screamed. The sound was inhuman, raw, furious, echoing through the estate like a war cry. Magic surged outward. Lucien raised his hand, shadows slamming into Valesra's power, the collision cracking stone and shattering windows. Mira was thrown backward, but the bracelet flared, anchoring her in place. Valesra staggered, shock flickering across her face. "What did you do?" Lucien's eyes were blazing now. "You attacked under my roof." Valesra's fury twisted into something desperate. "She's a threat," she spat. "You feel it too. She reminds the kingdom of things we buried." Lucien's jaw tightened. "You buried them." "I did not." Valesra turned fully toward Mira, eyes wild. "Do you know what night wardens do, little girl? They judge. They limit us. They strip power from those who don't deserve it." Myra's breath shook. "Then maybe that's why they were erased." Valesra's smile turned feral. "No. They were hunted." She lunged. Not at Lucien. At Mira. Time slowed. Lucien moved, But Valesra was faster, fueled by desperation and rage. Mira felt the moment stretch, the instant where her old life would have ended quietly forgotten. Instead, something inside her answered. The ring, still resting in the chamber, burned in her mind like a beacon. The bracelet flared. The shadows surged, not toward Lucien, toward Mira. They rose around her like wings, solid and warm and impossibly familiar. Valesra slammed into an invisible barrier and screamed as if burned. She fell back, clutching her arm, smoke curling from her skin. Mira stood frozen, heart hammering. Lucien stared at her, not with fear, with awe. You shielded yourself, he whispered. Mira's voice shook. I didn't mean to. Valesra looked at Mira now with something new in her eyes. Terror. You're awake, Valesra breathed. They're awake. Lucien stepped forward, his presence absolute. This ends now. Valesra scrambled to her feet, wild-eyed. You can't kill me. I am your fiancée. Lucien's voice was colder than death. You were. The word struck like a blade. Valesra's mouth fell open. Lucien raised his hand, shadows coiling tight around his fingers. By the authority of the Night Throne, I dissolve this bond. The estate trembled. A pulse of ancient magic rippled outward. Valesra screamed, not in rage this time but in loss. Her power shattered around her like glass. She collapsed to her knees. Lucien turned to Mira, his gaze steady. This is what you represent. Mira's chest tightened. I didn't want this. Lucien knelt before Valesra, his voice quiet and merciless. You wanted to rule through fear. The age of that rule is ending. Valesra looked up at Mira one last time, hatred, grief, and terror twisting together. This isn't over, she whispered. Lucien stood. For you it is. With a gesture, guards appeared, shadows solidifying into armored forms. Valesra was dragged away, screaming promises of revenge that echoed long after she vanished from sight. Silence fell. The atrium lay in ruins. Mira swayed. Lucien was at her side instantly, catching her before she fell. His arms were strong, unyielding. For the first time since she entered this world, Mira allowed herself to lean into them. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she whispered. Lucien's voice softened just for her. You didn't. He lifted her gently, cradling her as if she weighed nothing. You reminded us what restraint looks like, he said. And the kingdom answered. Mira closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her. As Lucien carried her through the shattered halls, one truth settled into her bones. She had not come to the Vampire King's estate to be punished. She had come to be revealed. And the night would never forget it. The queen who chose kindness. Mira woke to stillness. Not the tense, watchful silence of the throne room or the charged hush of corridors filled with power, but a softer quiet, like the pause after a storm when the world is deciding what comes next. She lay beneath dark linen sheets, warmth wrapped around her like a promise. Pale light filtered through tall curtains, silvered rather than golden, as if dawn itself were cautious inside the Vampire King's domain. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then memory rushed back in fragments. Valesra's scream, shadows rising at her command, Lucien's arms catching her as the world shattered. Mira's heart raced. She pushed herself upright. The bracelet was still on her wrist. It no longer burned. It rested there calmly, inert, as if satisfied. You're awake. Lucien's voice came from the far side of the room. Mira turned sharply. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, dressed not in royal black but in simple dark gray. No crown, no armor, no display of power. The morning light softened his sharp angles, made him look less like a force of nature and more like a man who had carried too much weight for too long. How long? Mira asked quietly. Lucien met her gaze. A full night. And most of the day. She exhaled shakily. Valesra? Lucien's jaw tightened. Imprisoned. Stripped of court access. Her allies are being questioned. Mira's stomach twisted. Because of me. Lucien crossed the room slowly. Because of her choices. Mira studied him, searching his face. And the court. They are afraid, Lucien said honestly. And curious. And divided. He stopped a few steps away from her bed. The night wardens were not erased quietly, he continued. Their memory was buried. And last night it resurfaced. Mira hugged the sheet around herself. I didn't ask to be a symbol. Lucien's voice softened. Neither did I. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Mira asked the question that had been burning in her chest. What happens to me now? Lucien didn't answer immediately. Instead he knelt. A vampire king, ancient, feared, absolute, lowered himself until they were eye level. Myra's breath caught. The court will demand answers, Lucien said quietly. They will want to name you, label you, use you. Myra swallowed. And you? Lucien's eyes held hers. I want to protect you. The honesty in his voice startled her more than power ever could. Protection from you? She asked softly. Lucien didn't flinch. From becoming what this world would make you if left unchecked. Myra considered him. She thought of the mortal quarter. Of her boarded window. Of Valestra's cruelty. Of how easily she could have died and been forgotten. And she thought of the moment the shadows answered her, not in rage but in recognition. I don't want to rule, Myra said. Lucien nodded once. Good. She frowned. That's good? Yes, he said simply. The ones who crave power are the least fit to wield it. Myra let out a shaky breath. Then what do you want from me? Lucien's gaze softened, something unguarded flickering beneath centuries of restraint. I want you to stand, he said. Not above. Not below. Beside. Myra's heart stuttered. As what? Lucien reached into his coat and withdrew her ring. He held it out, resting on his open palm. As who you already are, he said. A reminder. Myra stared at the ring. My mother? Her voice cracked. She knew. Lucien nodded. She hid you. And she saved this kingdom by doing so. Myra took the ring with trembling fingers. The moment it touched her skin it warmed, not burning, not pulsing, simply right. Lucien rose slowly. The court will gather tonight, he said. They will expect me to present judgment. Myra's pulse quickened. And what will you present? Lucien's lips curved faintly. Truth. That evening the great hall filled. Nobles gathered in cautious clusters. Immortals whispered behind gloved hands. Servants watched from the edges, breath held, hope and fear mixing in their eyes. Lucien sat upon the night throne. But Myra did not kneel before him. She stood at his side. Unadorned. Unarmed. Unbowed. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Lucien rose. Valestra Noctane has been removed, he announced. Not for defiance, but for cruelty. Gasps echoed. Lucien continued, voice steady and absolute. Fear is not governance. Power without restraint is decay. His gaze swept the room. This kingdom was once balanced by those who reminded us of that truth. Myra felt the weight of every eye turned toward her. Lucien extended his hand. Myra hesitated, then took it. This is Myra Ellen, Lucien said. Last of the night wardens. The hall erupted. Shouts. Protests. Denials. Lucien raised one hand, and silence fell instantly. She does not come to rule, he continued. She comes to remember. To witness. To stand where fear once stood unchallenged. Myra's voice trembled, but she spoke. I am not here to judge you, she said. I am here to remind you that dignity is not weakness. The servants listened hardest. The mortals felt it deepest. Lucien turned to Myra, his voice low enough only she could hear. If you wish to leave after this. Myra shook her head. No, she said softly. I spent my whole life being erased. I won't disappear again. Lucien's gaze warmed, just slightly. Then he did something no one in the hall expected. He bowed. Not in submission. In respect. The court fell to one knee, not because they were commanded but because they understood. Later, as the hall emptied and the night settled into something quieter, Myra stood with Lucien on a balcony overlooking Nightspire. The city looked different now. Less oppressive. Less afraid. I don't know what this makes me, Myra admitted. Lucien rested his forearms on the stone railing beside her. It makes you someone who chose kindness when power was offered. Myra smiled faintly. That sounds terrifying. Lucien's lips curved. It is. Their shoulders brushed, not by accident. Slow. Careful. Intentional. This won't be easy, Lucien said. Myra met his gaze. Nothing worth saving ever is. The moon rose higher. The shadows settled. And for the first time in centuries Nightspire breathed, not in fear but in balance. Myra Ellen, once a quiet waitress, once erased, once powerless, stood beside the vampire king. Not as his possession. Not as his ornament. But as his equal. And the night at long last learned the difference.